The $10 trillion collapse, why Asia's water tower is already dying. Before sunrise, a fisherman on the Tonle Sap lifts his net. It drips. No weight, no silver, just weeds. In Assam, seedlings that should be knee-deep by noon curl in dust. At 6 p.m., a megacity's skyline brightens, then a village 2 countries away hears its river drop like a door shutting. This isn't weather. A hand on a hidden dial turned water into a schedule. Everyone was told the Himalaya hold endless water. They don't. The ice is thinning, and the gates are learning new tricks. The only question now is brutal and immediate. Who controls the last reliable drops, and why are they hiding the plan? Prove it fast. The myth goes like this: a mountain as big as the sky guarantees water forever. Snow piles up, glaciers bank it, rivers cash the checks all year. That story built cities, power grids, and planting calendars from Pakistan to Vietnam. It's also wrong. The Tibetan Plateau's glaciers have been losing mass steadily for 2 decades. Researchers estimate roughly 340 gigatons gone from 2000 to 2018, with loss rates doubling across the Himalaya after 2000. That endless account is shrinking, and the withdrawals keep rising. Get this, there's a short-term bonus that looks like good news. As ice retreats, melt pulses can temporarily boost dry season flow. Governments point to that bump and call it resilience. But the bonus is a loan. When the glacier empties, late spring and dry season base flow drop. The calendar slips. Taps, turbines, and transplanting dates slip with it. What nobody highlights at the ribbon cuttings: black carbon darkens this whole picture. Soot from stoves, diesel, and industry drifts onto snow, lowering its reflectivity so it melts earlier and faster. Measurements across high mountain Asia show soot rising sharply since the 1990s, matching an acceleration in retreat. It's a quiet push that turns white to gray and weeks to days. Earlier melt means water shows up before fields or grids need it, and there's less left when they do. Meanwhile, another truth hides under the word dam. Dams don't make water, they move time. A run-of-river facility with small storage can still flip a valley's rhythm, peaking at dusk for the grid, then starving fish in canals by morning. Storage dams go further, holding pulses for days or weeks and releasing on command. The hydrograph becomes a sawtooth, up for evening demand, down for the night, up again when markets pay. That's reliable megawatts for a city, but chaos for a farmer reading the river by ear. Upstream advantage stacks beyond concrete. Gauges on the plateau see floods hours to days before plains do. In theory, data sharing saves lives. In practice, selective transparency becomes leverage. Monsoon months bring agreed bulletins. Shoulder seasons lean on memoranda without teeth. When a release arrives early or late, a ministry spokesperson cites operational needs, and villages downstream count dead fish or sanded seedbeds. Here's the twist: those hours are worth more than water, they're worth trust. Scale the stakes. Asia's rivers born on this roof: Indus, Sutlej, Brahmaputra, Salween, Mekong, Yangtze, Yellow, touch power grids for hundreds of millions, irrigate breadbaskets, and underpin fisheries that supply crucial protein. A week's mistiming along one cascade ripples into kilowatts missed in one place and onions priced higher in another. Stack multiple basins misbehaving at once, drought here, a peaking surge there, and the hidden bill lands in energy imports, crop losses, dredging, health, migration, and insurance. That's where the trillions live, not in one disaster, but in coordinated nuisance turning structural risk. Here's the thing about sediment: the currency deltas run on. Every reservoir protects turbines by trapping silt. Every trapped ton is a ton that won't rebuild floodplains or keep a delta above the sea. Fertility drops, fertilizer bills rise, channels clog, dredges chase moving bottoms. Downstream, shrimpers and rice farmers call it bad luck. Upstream, it's a maintenance win with a line item cost exported to someone else. Public messaging sticks to 2 words: hydropower flood control. Internally, planners talk timing, a city's evening peak, a factory's shift change, a brokerage's price signal. That's not sinister by itself, it's modern, but pair it with thinning ice and a warming plateau that tugs the monsoon into bursts and pauses, and timing becomes a weapon, not in headlines, on calendars. A gate held an hour longer during a hot spell can sink a nursery. The same hour in a wet week can spare a substation. Either way, the decision lives far from the field it changes. What about treaties? On the Indus, hard rules keep two rivals inside a lane even through wars. On the Brahmaputra, there's no basin-wide binding pact, just seasonal data sharing, while cascades rise on both sides of the border. On the Mekong, China isn't bound by the Lower Basins Commission. It shares some data through a parallel forum. That patchwork leaves gaps wide enough for rumor to do as much damage as a release. Now layer the plateau's physics. Permafrost slumps, wetlands shrink, and what used to act as a sponge turns into a slick. Storms spike higher, base flow weakens. Glacial lake outburst floods, those sudden rock-laced torrents, add fear that lingers long after the water recedes. Clean snow arrives darker, melt windows shift weeks. Forecasts hedge. Operators hedge too, holding back, then getting hit by a burst they can't keep, or releasing into a valley that isn't ready. So the lie isn't just endless water. It's the idea that volume alone defines security. Timing is wealth here. Who measures it, who discloses it, and who turns it into electrons decides whose lights, fields, and markets run on time. The plateau's emptiness makes projects easier to build and patrols easier to stage. Corridors carry turbines in and megawatts out. Silence protects gates. If that sounds abstract, watch what timing does to real lives downstream. A fisherman reads a lake by the paddles and comes home light. A woman stands knee-deep, waiting for water that now arrives at night. A trader sees fish shrink and prices jump before the news does. That's the calendar being rewritten, one gate at a time. Faces and fields. Here's where it gets personal. While all that was happening in steel and policy rooms, a farmer in Assam was timing life by river height. She set transplanting when the water kissed a mark on the Ghat steppes. It used to be a calendar you could touch. This year the mark lied. The river rose at night, then fell by breakfast. Seedlings sat in cracked trays at noon, while water surged past empty fields at dusk. Her father taught her to listen for the low murmur that meant, tomorrow, knee-deep. It didn't come. A week later, she gambled, planted in dust, then watched a peaking pulse arrive while her tools were in the shed. 1 hour of gate turn upstream erased a month's wages. 3 days earlier, on Cambodia's Tonle Sap, a fisher pushed off before sunrise, reading the lake by sound under his paddle. For years, the reversal, lake breathing in with the Mekong's swell, told him when nets would come up heavy. Lately, the breath caught, the pulse flattened. He still rode the same line, but fish came home smaller and later. Market buyers knew before he did. Prices dropped a day ahead of his catch because traders were watching a cascade's peaking schedule on their phones. He was watching clouds. Here's where it gets interesting. Food prices shifted before the news did, and the lake felt like it had learned a new language. Unknown to them, across the delta in Bangladesh, a schoolteacher kept a flood diary. The right flood fed, the wrong one poisoned. In June, a broad, gentle swell brought silt that brightened fields and refilled ponds. In August, a late, sharp crest broke an embankment and salted a village. Same measured centimeters on a chart, different consequences. She circled days when the color of the water turned tea-brown with good silt. Fewer circles, more smudges. When April flows ran thin, the tubewell tasted brackish, and rice seedlings went yellow. She started storing water in drums and texted cousins across the border when a gauge upstream read, "Operational release." Those messages arrived faster than official warnings. Now remember, this is a household economy. Evening peaking upstream sends a sawtooth through rooms. In India's interior, a mill ran later when the grid pulsed hot at 6 p.m. The canal arrived cold at dawn. A shopkeeper changed opening hours because pumps finally filled tanks at 11 at night. A kid did homework under a streetlight because power shifted to match urban evenings, not rural mornings. Micro stories hide macro rules. A fisherman sold his net to buy diesel after dry season surges made his old route unworkable. A weaver lost a week when a sudden drawdown stranded her dye vats. Her ledger wrote, "River," like an unreliable partner. Meanwhile, one valley over, a relocation order came framed as restoration. Tents for apartments, nets for factory shifts. The stipend looked like safety until a storm met a test release. The river's voice changed. It had been chatter over stones. Now it hummed lower, steadier, until it didn't. A flood slid under streetlights that weren't there last year. A father learned to touch a radiator at dawn to guess the gate upstream. Warm meant night peaking, cold meant wait. His daughter timed school by the hum. What nobody knew at the time was how fast rumors move when water lies. In Mekong villages, satellite charts printed on paper showed low flows in a drought year. Officials explained storage. Boats landed light anyway. In Assam, a WhatsApp forward warned of a midnight crest. Half the hamlet slept on rooftops for nothing. The other half stopped believing the next alert. Trust, once gone, doesn't refill like a canal. Here's the quiet arithmetic. 1 hour's mistimed release equals a week's fish lost, equals a month's rice bought on credit, equals a child pulled from school for a season. Multiply across basins, across seasons that used to rhyme and now collide, and household calendars fill with scratches and arrows. This is timing as a weapon without speeches. It writes itself into kitchens. A mother counts tablets when the clinic's pump stalls. A trader marks red days when salinity creeps past the sweet line on a handheld meter. A monk blesses a procession that pauses at a checkpoint, not a shrine. If you want to understand why timing became leverage, go back to the map's origin, the corridors that let one hand turn a dial and make 100 small lives blink. The historical route, how the map became a lever. Get ready for the reveal. To understand why a dial in one gorge can redraw a harvest 2 countries away, we need to go back to the land's first decision. Collision built a plateau, but it also drew corridors. When the Indian plate slammed into Eurasia, it didn't just hoist summits. It stacked ridges into long north-south walls, carved east-west gorges, and scattered livable pockets like beads on braided rivers. Mobility kept people alive here. Herders moved with grass, traders with passes, monks with seasons. The emptiness between nodes wasn't a gap, it was insurance. Empires learned that lesson early. The Qing treated Tibet as buffer more than heartland, ambans in Lhasa, caravans on the Yarlung's terraces, tribute measured in distance and calm. Reach the knots, watch the passes, and let the open land do the rest. British forays from India tested that logic, sketching a line on a map, the McMahon Line, where ridges and rumor still set the real border. Maps hardened, but the ground stayed seasonal. Then the 20th century flipped the equation. A new state rising in the east saw vulnerability where the Qing had seen insulation. Distance wasn't safety, it was exposure. The PRC arrived not as a swarm, but as a net. Airstrips where valleys allowed, roads stitched over permafrost and scree, garrisons in towns that already held. The pattern was clear: grip the nodes, straighten the corridors, keep the spaces between legible. Emptiness became policy. From buffer logic to corridor control sounds abstract until you watch steel do it. Highways crawled over passes with avalanche sheds and culverts. Later, rails learned to breathe thin air, thermosiphons wicked heat out of permafrost. Oxygen pumps tamed passenger cars. Each span cut days into hours. Each siding turned junctions into magnets. Towns thickened, grasslands thinned. The state's reach stopped being seasonal. It became scheduled, and scheduled power means scheduled rivers. Meanwhile, another layer stacked on the map, data. Gauges rose where the headwaters begin. Flood warnings learned to travel faster than clouds. The institutional pivot looked mundane: hydro bureaus, survey teams, weather stations, but it taught policy to hold the knots with numbers. The same corridors that brought diesel and transformers could export timing decisions as electrons. Ultra-high voltage lines marched alongside rails. A gate's hour upstream could light a district downstream. Past treaties and present gaps frame the choices. Where rules exist, like on the Indus, papers held even through wars. Where they don't, Brahmaputra, Mekong arrangements leaned on memoranda and seasons. Basin commissions without teeth met maps with fresh concrete. Rumors of diversions traveled faster than projects, shaping politics without pipes. But hold on, that emptiness near borders, it wasn't failure to populate, it was a lever. Fewer civilians meant fewer evacuations during standoffs. Fewer settlements along headwaters meant fewer vetoes at dam sites, easier land acquisition, simpler patrols. When glacial lakes burst or test releases misbehaved, casualty lists stayed short. In a place where altitude taxes engines and lungs, legibility becomes power. A dust plume on an empty slope reads like punctuation. A new bridge appears where last week was ice. Follow the steel, it points to the gates. Rail spurs don't end at scenic overlooks. They end at river bends tightened into ladders of concrete. Logistics wrote the sequence: depot, tunnel, switchyard, dam. Maintenance crews became governance, thermosiphons tended, embankments regraded, rockfall nets mended. Permanence grew costly and present. Once the corridor exists, the gorge pays rent forever. That price buys control. The human map folded with it. Monasteries that once drew soft boundaries across valleys found themselves on timetables. Pilgrimage routes crossed checkpoints. Festivals moved to plazas where barriers could guide crowds. Faith adapted, movement shrank. A relocation order could turn pasture into a reservoir bank and a lineage into a street address, all by citing restoration and megawatts in the same sentence. The river's old chatter over stones learned a new hum. The result wasn't inevitable, it was chosen. Collision offered height and corridors. Policy learned to hold them. Emptiness became curated. Nodes became levers. Data turned into disclosure or delay. And because those rivers leave the plateau and grow into nations, a decision in one gorge now reaches kitchens and markets 1,000 kilometers away. The map didn't just become a lever, it became a clock. Steel over sky, corridors to control headwaters. While maps drew lines, steel taught them to hold. The first lesson came with altitude. Engines gasp where oxygen thins, so locomotives were rebuilt to breathe harder, turbochargers tuned for climbs at 5,000 meters, fuel mixes adjusted so combustion wouldn't stall on an icy morning. Passenger cars became moving clinics, piping oxygen under seats so tourists didn't faint between tunnels. Under every wheel, the ground was changing state. Permafrost wanted to slump. Thermosiphons were drilled like metal reeds to wick heat upward, crushed rock laid to vent cold, embankments layered to keep summer from chewing the base. It wasn't elegant, it was relentless. Keep the lines straight, keep the ground frozen, keep trains on time. Here's where it gets interesting. Notice where the steel goes. It hugs valleys, kisses basins, and leaps to places that already mattered. Lhasa turned from highland capital into a logistics throat. Depots stacked with pipe, turbines, and transformers became the plateau's metronomes. Westward, track shadowed the Yarlung's course toward Shigatse. Eastward, it crept toward the deep gorges where a river becomes two countries, question at once. Every spur was a sentence that ended at a dam site. The corridor didn't democratize space, it concentrated power. Unknown to most riders, every kilometer is a promise to concrete. A siding here means a staging yard there. Bridges rated for heavy axle loads don't ask whether they carry flour or penstocks. Convoys of nacelles and generator rotors moved like bead strings under police lights, right to bends already marked for cascading walls. In narrow gorges, logistics isn't background. It's force projection with invoices. If a turbine goes down, a night train can deliver the part. If a spillway gate sticks, a maintenance crew arrives with thermite and a list. Permanence is policy disguised as repair. Ultra-high voltage lines marched in parallel, silver pylons striding across scree and pasture. Electrons don't care about borders, they care about resistance. Those lines turned upstream timing into downstream consumption, peaking decisions carried as current toward demand centers a day's drive away. A switch in a control room on the plateau could nudge a megacity's evening lights brighter, while a village in the valley heard the river lower its voice. That's not drama, that's a schedule. Maintenance didn't look like sovereignty until it did. Summer thaw softened a culvert, crews injected grout. Frost heave buckled a slab, a grinder shaved it back before the ballast rolled. An avalanche shed took a hit, welders stitched it shut under floodlights. A train that doesn't stop is a boundary you can't argue with. Patrols ride rails and roads alike. Dust plumes on otherwise empty hillsides tell you if an unscheduled truck moved. Emptiness makes surveillance cheap. The corridor turns that discount into policy. Dual-use stopped being a euphemism the day an exercise overlapped with a delivery. The same segment that feeds a dam can move armor. Oxygen debt becomes a tactical edge for units stationed at 3,500 meters, their blood acclimatized, their logistics prepositioned by the siding. Airfields extend runways to match density altitudes. Fuel bladders sit under tarps at junction towns. None of it needs a press conference. You can read it in the cadence of trains. Meanwhile, steel steers markets. Mines open where ore meets road, not where geology whispers alone. Copper, lithium, and tungsten that once hid behind 7 days of mule track now sit one good highway from a crane. Tourism follows too, coaches with oxygen packs, itineraries that match station clocks and festival permits. Money moves along gradients of accessibility. Off-corridor villages watch taillights and learn that growth is a timetable, not a promise. There was one problem the crews solved by ritual: ground that won't stay still. Thermosiphons demand rent. Reflective rock blankets need replacing. Drainage must be coaxed where ice lenses try to hold it. Engineers carry infrared cameras like doctors' stethoscopes, hunting warm patches that predict failure. Governance becomes a grader scraping ruts before a supply train derails and a county runs out of diesel. When a storm closes a pass, managers do triage, dim streetlights to keep the oxygen plant running, throttle an industrial load to keep the clinic warm. Logistics is politics in a spreadsheet. The corridor also exports certainty. A dam ladder isn't just concrete, it's a calendar wired to a dispatch center. A peaking schedule demands that a train arrive with a bearing, a crew, and a window when the line is quiet. River ice used to govern winter, now inspection cycles do. If a glacial lake outburst flood takes out a spur, contingency maps unroll. Alternate route, reserve stocks, drones for survey, front-end loaders to clear rock until a bridge truss assembled by number slots into place. Fail small, fix fast, because the grid downstream won't tolerate improvisation. While that was happening, emptiness hardened into buffer along the ridges. Fewer towns near the steel meant fewer detours when a convoy moved, fewer evacuations if a standoff flared, fewer eyes to stir rumor when a night train hauled something no one needed to name. Silence kept timing safe. The plateau's old habit of distance was curated into a system that could turn water into hours and hours into money. Steel delivers concrete and concrete delivers clocks. Follow the rails and lines far enough uphill and you end at a control room where the river's voice is measured in megawatts and ramp rates. The gorge becomes a valve, the calendar becomes an instrument, and everything downstream, fish markets, transplanting dates, evening peaks, plays along whether they know the tune or not. The dam calendar, how timing rewrites nations. Cliffhanger you can feel, run-of-river sounds harmless until you see the teeth. A small forebay, a narrow reservoir, and gates that breathe with the grid. Operators ramp up at dusk to chase evening demand, then throttle back after midnight. Downstream, that rhythm lands like a metronome on a living river. Shallows fill and empty within hours. Fish that queue on steady flow for migration find themselves stranded on gravel at dawn. Farmers who once read the bank by hand find a canal that runs fat at the wrong time and thin when the field is ready. Storage turns the dial further. Week-long pulses are banked behind concrete and released when markets pay. A flood that would have spread silt broadly in June becomes a measured pulse in July to cover a regional heat wave. Cities feel grateful. Villages below the dam ladder count the cost in bent seedlings and empty fish traps. The hydrograph used to arc and fade with seasons. Now it looks like a saw laid on its side, sharp edges, hard corners, and very little in between. Here's where it gets practical. Grid operators call it flexibility. Hydropower can ramp faster than thermal plants and steadier than wind. In a system thick with solar, peaking dams cover the hour when the sun drops and air conditioners climb. In the control room, it's elegant. Megawatts dispatched, frequency held, blackouts avoided. In the valley, it's sudden swell at 6, quiet at 2, then a 4 a.m. spike to refill the forebay before morning demand. That gap between elegance and impact is policy written in water. Sediment takes the long view, and it doesn't like schedules. Turbines hate grit, so reservoirs do the cleaning by trapping it. Every year a delta's inheritance stops at a dam face. Downstream, fertility sinks. Farmers make up the shortfall with fertilizers that wash back as nutrient pulses and algal blooms. Channels rise with weeds. Dredges arrive, expensive and late. Meanwhile, operators upstream note improved turbine efficiency and longer asset life. The bill lives beyond the wall. Evidence isn't abstract. On the Mekong, cascades in the upper reaches have flattened the dry season heartbeat. Tonle Sap's famed reversal is arriving later, staying weaker, and pushing fish into smaller windows for spawning, consistent with observed low-flow years and altered lake dynamics. On the Brahmaputra's shoulders, small shifts in spring flow, nudged by peaking and test releases, ripple into irrigation calendars across Assam. 1,000 micro-adjustments add up. Pump schedules, labor hiring, seed purchases, and debt rolled forward when the river blinks off at the wrong hour. Then there's the daily, up-down ramp rates. Fish eggs glued to cobbles don't survive a 10-centimeter drop in 20 minutes. Fry moving nocturnally to avoid predators get swept into dewatered side channels by pre-dawn refill. Guides talk about perch lines on the bank, a dirty stripe that tells you where water climbed last night and where it will leave you by morning. It's a clock with no face, only evidence. Data sharing could soften the edges. In some basins, agreements provide monsoon season levels, 5 days, advance for major releases, and hourly data during floods. But shoulder seasons remain gray. Memoranda of understanding aren't binding calendars. Operators cite grid contingencies. Downstream planners stack contingency plans of their own, build more storage at the tail end, switch crop varieties, move to shrimp as salinity creeps inland. Each adaptation solves a problem and seeds another. Market design hides inside all of this. Energy-only markets reward peak-hour megawatts more than steady baseflow. Ancillary service payments turn dams into frequency guardians, paid to twitch on command. The river doesn't bill for ramping. Households downstream do, in errands delayed and food gone dear. A trader at a wholesale fish market doesn't need a gauge. The price curve shows when an upstream gate learned to sprint. Here's the complicating twist. Climate volatility pushes grid operators deeper into hydropaking. Solar's duck curve grows steeper, wind sags during heat domes, fossil plants retire under emissions rules. Dams become the shock absorbers of a jittery system. That's not villainy, it's physics. But every avoided blackout upstream writes a quieter failure downstream. A nursery flooded out of phase, a salinity line creeping past an intake, a community well turned metallic in April. Some fixes exist, and they're not science fiction. Minimum environmental flows can set a floor under the sawtooth. Ramping rate limits smooth the slopes so fish and irrigators can adjust. Synchronized peaking across cascades reduces compounding shocks. Sediment bypass tunnels move grit past the wall during high flows. Batteries paired with dams absorb the twitch so gates don't have to. All of it costs megawatt hours, all of it buys something harder to price: trust. Trust matters because rumors move faster than water. If a release arrives unexpectedly, a WhatsApp group can empty a town square or keep families asleep on a night when they shouldn't be. In drought years, suspicion can do more damage than a cubic meter per second. Politicians promise diversions that don't exist, protests flare at embankments, and a flood warning ignored once becomes a tragedy twice. This is the calendar that rewrites nations, not with diversions that make headlines, but with dials turned at 19:00 and 03:30, evening peaks that light a distant skyline and pull water out from under a farmer's feet, dry season shaves that keep a megacity cool, and salted deltas roots. The choice isn't between power and people, it's between blind peaking and negotiated time. Between treating rivers as wires and treating them as seasons that still feed the kitchens they pass. Climate squeeze, glaciers, heat pumps, and GLOFs. Heat rewrites the high country faster than policy can. Instruments on ridge stations show the plateau warming quicker than the global average. Snowlands creep upslope, and melt windows slide earlier into spring. In the near term, rivers look generous. Extra melt swells shoulder season flow. That's the bonus everyone points to. But it's a front-loaded payment from a shrinking account. When the ice stock thins, late spring fades, and dry season base flow weakens. The calendar, the valley trusted stops, matching the sky. Black carbon makes the slide steeper. Soot from diesel, stoves, and stacks rides winds from the south and west, settles into snowfields, and darkens what used to reflect. The effect is small in color and large in timing. Low albedo means more absorbed sun, earlier thaw, and pulses that arrive before fields or grids need them. Researchers digging ice cores on the plateau see the same story: rising soot since the 1990s, acceleration in retreat to match. It's not just warmer air, it's darker snow. Permafrost answers heat by letting go. The ground that anchored roads and held water like a slow sponge starts to slump. Drainage patterns flip, alpine wetlands shrink or shift, springs wander. On a hydrograph that shows up as flashier peaks after storms and thinner threads through dry spells, a landscape that once inhaled and exhaled slowly now coughs, harder bursts, longer pauses. Operators hedge with storage, herders hedge with longer migrations. Both find the ground under their feet less dependable, consistent, with observed permafrost degradation on the plateau. Then there's the plateau heat pump, The engine few outside the region talk about, but farmers feel in their bones. As the surface warms in spring and early summer, air rises and helps pull moist monsoon flow northward. Change the surface, less snow, more dark ground, and the pump's cadence shifts. Some years it tugs rain in earlier, then sputters, bunching storms into violent bursts separated by dry pauses. Seeds wait under dust, then drown in a 2-day torrent. Reservoir managers stretch releases on a forecast that hedges, then get caught by a sudden wall of rain when gates are already high. Glacial lakes turn that volatility into headlines. As glaciers retreat, they leave behind walls made of loose rock and ice, weak natural dams holding turquoise bowls in high cirques. A hot week, a slope failure, or a heavy rain can tip the balance. A glacial lake outburst flood doesn't announce itself with a neat crest. It arrives as a brown, boulder-laced wall. Bridges go in minutes. Power lines vanish. Fields flatten under slurry that sets like cement. The water recedes by nightfall. The fear stays for seasons. Kids learn new routes to school around a missing span. Insurers learn new exclusions. Black carbon and warming team up to move the year forward. Farmers in mid-altitude basins tell you spring arrives a week early, but leaves a month early too. Flowering shifts. Pest cycles shift. Snowmelt-fed canals flush when soil is still cold, then run whisper-thin when seedlings thirst. Operators in control rooms see it as misaligned curves, renewables sagging under heat domes, hydropower twitching to cover, then held back for August. A system built on predictable delay, snow banking monsoon excess, loses its slack. Forecasting strains, seasonal outlooks used to anchor decisions, planting windows, reservoir rule curves, maintenance on lines. Now the variance swallows the mean. An El Niño tilts odds drier. The plateau's darkened surface amplifies local heating and fragments the monsoon's arrival. In the valley that reads as a false start, 2 rains and silence. Upstream, operators split the difference, hold too much and risk a spill into unready channels, release too early and face a late July power crunch. Each wrong bet feeds the rumor mill downstream. Permafrost slumps also change hazard maps. Rockfall increases above gorges slated for dam ladders. Landslides that once froze in place creep on warm nights. Road cuts ooze. Thermosiphons that kept embankments rigid demand more attention. Maintenance windows shrink, and the cost of permanence climbs. When a glacial lake lets go above a construction site, the runway of good weather isn't just shorter, it's stitched with sirens. Communities adapt with whatever tools they can reach. In high valleys, simple siphons drain perched lakes before monsoon. Prayer flags share space with sensor poles. In Assam, embankment committees sketch new breach points to relieve pressure away from homes. In Cambodia, fish refuges, deep pools set aside, keep broodstock alive through weird dry season shelves. Upstream, some operators test gentler ramping. A pilot sediment bypass nudges grit past concrete during safe flows. These aren't silver bullets, they're friction added to a sliding system. Here's the squeeze in one sentence. Warming speeds the conveyor belt just as the belt's flywheel ice shrinks. The plateau that once steadied Asia's water turns into a strict accountant. Timing tightens, errors cost more. Upstream, that argues for tighter grips. More gauges, firmer rules in control rooms, gates that answer markets and risk models. Downstream, it argues for guarantees, minimum lifeline flows, transparent peaking schedules, sediment to deltas, and promises that hold when the sky doesn't. Storage looks like the fix until it is. Big reservoirs promise smoothing, then concentrate risk. A hotter, burstier monsoon means wider swings between empty and emergency spill. Batteries and smarter dispatch can take the twitch off hydro without turning rivers into wires every night. Wetlands and floodplains, protected or rebuilt, can buy days and centimeters that matter. Trust, rebuilt in increments, can turn a midnight rumor into a message believed. Meanwhile, the ice ledger keeps turning pages. Fewer white fields each spring, more turquoise bowls rimmed with loose stone, more brown walls that roar without warning. Calendars in kitchens pick up extra pencil marks. In control rooms, operators stare at screens where curves no longer match last decade's training. The climate squeeze doesn't announce itself with a single catastrophe. It arrives as a misfit between clocks, sky, river, grid, and field, and the knowledge that the old delays are gone. Here's the shift. Upstream physics has set the tempo. Now watch how that new tempo gets translated into posture and policy along the ridgelines, where thin air turns timing into border politics. Storage versus sponge, build more or let land work. Storage looks like certainty, a wall, a lake, a dial that claims to tame bursts and bridge droughts. Ministries see megawatts, acre-feet, and neat graphs, but build enough concrete and you don't just store water, you concentrate risk. Plot twist, certainty can crack under midnight storm. A hotter, jumpier monsoon turns reservoirs into gamblers. Too low and the grid gasps in August. Too high and a midnight storm writes emergency spill across a valley that planted for calm. Meanwhile, the land we drained and fenced once did quiet accounting. Wetlands, floodplains, alpine meadows, and permafrost held back pulses, leaked out baseflow, trapped silt, and fed fish nurseries without a budget line. The choice isn't romantic. It's practical. Add one more giant gate or knit 1,000 small sponges that don't fail all at once. Here's where it gets crazy. Small local sponges can outrun one giant gate. A chain of wetlands upstream shaves centimeters off a flood crest. Managed floodplains let a river breathe sideways for a week, dropping peak height enough to keep a market dry. Controlled drainage on fields holds rain in soil when the sky over-delivers, then releases it when canals sulk. None of these pour electrons at 7 p.m., but together they push timing back towards seasons instead of switches. Ministries live on different clocks. Energy counts quarters and evening peaks. Agriculture counts planting windows. Fisheries count lunar cycles. Water agencies count design floods on 100-year charts that now arrive twice a decade. Put all four in a room and you hear competing calendars, not malice. Concrete answers one calendar with confidence and leaves the rest to adapt. Sponges ask everyone to compromise. Gentler peaking, room for water on purpose, sediment allowed to move where it feeds the future instead of jamming behind a wall. Transparent rules become infrastructure. Guaranteed minima, true lifeline flows that hold through heat, tell farmers what they can risk. Ramping rate limits turn a sawtooth into a slope fish can ride. Synchronized peaking across a ladder of dams prevents a stacked punch. Sediment bypasses and sluicing windows are scheduled with planting and spawning, not just turbine maintenance. None of this changes the electrons a city needs. It changes when the river takes a breath so that a kitchen can plan dinner without guessing a gate. Finance follows stories, which is why press releases love ribbon cuttings. But wait, there's more. Money can back rules, not just concrete. Pay for performance on environmental flows, indexed to verified gauges downstream. Insurance premia that drop when ramping bans are respected for a season. Credit enhancements for utilities that pair peaking with batteries so gates don't twitch every time a cloud moves. Sovereign guarantees that ride on sediment targets met, not just megawatt hours delivered. Dollars chase certainty. Certainty can be data and trust, not just a wall. Communities already test the sponge. In deltas, embankments that once tried to banish floods now include sacrificial sections that fail safely into fields designated to flood. In Assam, raised hand pumps keep sweet water above creeping salinity. Island refuges protect brood fish when dry season shelves go weird. In headwaters, siphons draw down risky glacial lakes before monsoon, and willow fences catch silt on eroding banks. The fixes are humble and repeatable. They don't headline, they hold. Operators can meet them halfway. Pair dams with batteries so a 1-hour evening sprint doesn't yank a river twice. Hold a sediment window after the first monsoon surge and publish it so farmers and fishers can plan. Share hourly data year-round, not just in flood months, and accept audits by basin panels that include the people who live with the river's voice. Trust turns a rumor into a message believed, and a night siren into an orderly move instead of a stampede. There's a fear baked into letting land work that you're giving up control, but control that breaks in one storm isn't control, it's theater. 1,000 small sponges fail gently. A network of rules bends without snapping. A battery stack at a powerhouse delays a gate by 20 minutes and saves a bank full of eggs. You can measure those outcomes and pay for them. Meanwhile, cities still want light at 7, factories still want shifts on time, and fields still want knee-deep on a Tuesday. The answer is coordination, not purity. Keep the big reservoirs. Use them as slow lungs, not drum kits. Let rivers flood where they can without tragedy, and make those places official, on maps with payments to the people who host the water. Bring sediment home to deltas with bypasses and engineered pulses tied to tides and planting. Build more sounds decisive until it is. Let land work sounds soft until you watch it shave a crest below a levee top. The plateau's strict accountant won't accept slogans. It will accept timing that spreads risk, rules that hold under heat, and investments that buy hours where hours matter. Meanwhile, the border that never sleeps hardens along the ridges, and corridors keep their schedule. Emptiness carries policy. The question is whether kitchens and markets get a calendar they can trust, not just a dial someone else turns. Border friction, quiet standoffs, and open secrets. Meanwhile, while storage versus sponge plays out in valleys, the ridgelines don't sleep. Up here, border friction is measured in breath and fuel, not speeches. This is the bridge from climate to control. As the ice thins and rivers twitch, both sides harden routines, schedule convoys tighter, and treat timing as security. At 4,500 meters, every kilogram costs more oxygen than it's worth. That's why high-altitude logistics isn't a backdrop, it's the whole play. A convoy leaves a depot at dawn, climbs switchbacks under avalanche sheds, then idles at a pass where the air feels thin enough to snap. 20 kilometers away, across a line that looks like a ridge in the haze, another convoy mirrors the move. Nobody fires. Everyone counts minutes, fuel drums, and the pulse oximeter on a young driver's finger. Oxygen debt becomes a tactical edge. Units-based high adapt blood and routine. Rotations build muscle memory written in altitude. A brigade near a siding at 3,800 meters can move fast because trains already solved the climb. Across the valley, a road built last year still cracks under thaw, and every gearbox pays the price. Speed is logistics, and logistics is sovereign presence without saying so. Roads to airfields tell the same story. Runways stretch longer than maps suggest because density altitude steals lift. Fuel bladders sit behind berms, heaters humming to keep diesel from gelling at night. Helicopters weave patrol patterns around winds that flip in 10 minutes. A frozen windsock in a crossbreeze becomes policy. You land or you don't. The distance between a planned rotation and a grounded flight gets measured in how quickly a rumor turns into a headline. Depots dot the corridor spines like beads, fuel, rations, bridge trusses stacked by number. Meanwhile, emptiness acts like a buffer you can't insure. Fewer civilians near ridges mean fewer evacuations when drills become standoffs. Fewer hamlets where a line of trucks rattles by means fewer witnesses when a night move needs to stay a rumor. Emptiness isn't silence, it's controlled signal. Unknown to the convoys, satellites watch dust plumes on both sides and call them by name. A new gravel fan on a slope that was clean last week. A tent city blooming at a saddle, then gone. Open source analysts post annotated images, drawing arrows no official will confirm. The cost of deception climbs with every pixel, so deception moves into timing. A convoy paused at noon to dodge a satellite swath. A bulldozer buried under tarps until clouds cover a pass. The game isn't dramatic. It's scheduled. High-altitude outposts live on calendars 2 weeks long. Acclimatization regimens dictate rotations. Sleep low, work high, don't push too fast on day 4. Thin air penalties make every plan humble. You can chart a company's endurance with a spreadsheet. Oxygen cylinders consumed per shift, liters of diesel per kilometer at -15 degrees C, spares required when permafrost slumps under a culvert. Each line item is a reason to avoid escalation. Risk isn't just bullets, it's a truck axle that snaps on a corner that doesn't forgive. Emptiness as buffer sounds sterile until you see the ledger. A standoff that lasts a week in summer means more high-altitude pulmonary edema than press releases. An emergency road opening after a landslide needs graders, not slogans. The policy that kept settlements thin near ridges earns its keep when a garrison can shift without threading school buses and markets. The same emptiness that simplified dam sites simplifies crisis. There was one problem the planners couldn't outbuild. Rivers ignore lines on maps. Snowmelt and monsoon pulses don't check passports. A release timed for a grid can run thin or fat across a border where a farmer reads knee-deep by feel. A test spill meant to check a gate can arrive as a midnight scare in a village that votes. When headwaters sit in one country and slack water frames a bridge in another, timing becomes diplomacy disguised as hydrology. Satellite eyes turn that dilemma into spectacle. During drought, Charts circulate showing upstream reservoirs fuller than expected. Commentary rages. Officials cite multi-year averages. Fishers point to light nets. In flood, images of brown surges racing toward bridges go viral before warnings land in kitchens. Suspicion fills every gap left by opaque operations. In a valley where cell towers outnumber sirens, rumor management becomes a security task. Cliffhanger: one bad alert can erase a year of trust. Maintenance is the open secret that binds the ridges to the rivers. Avalanche sheds, thermosiphons, slope nets, each fix is a tell. You can map intent by watching repair crews. A newly armored cut bank near a bend slated for a future ladder says more than a press conference. A rapid response bridge assembled by number after a slide suggests contingency maps live in drawers not meant for public eyes. Cross town, the quiet standoff continues in procurement offices. Batteries ordered in bulk for peaking dampers signal a negotiating position downstream. We can ease ramping if you ease rhetoric. A data-sharing pilot offers hourly flows year-round from one gauge, then stalls on an annex about audits. The dance happens between engineers who speak in ramp rates and diplomats who speak in seasons. Meanwhile, a market 2 days away prices fish on whispers. Here's the teeth-gritting truth: border friction doesn't have to explode to hurt. It hums at low volume until kitchens adjust. A truck delays delivering seeds by a week because a convoy took the road. A bridge weight limit tightens after a crack, and buses reroute, raising fares. A monastery's festival permit shifts a day to avoid an exercise. These micro-corrections map a frontier as surely as trenches ever did. Quiet standoffs isn't a euphemism, it's a strategy. Keep the oxygen flowing, the fuel topped, the lines straight, and the eyes open. Let rivers carry the calendar and pretend the dial turns itself. The open secret is that timing of gates, of trains, of rumors does more than posts and patrols. It writes borders into daily life without painting them on rock. Downstream lives, calendars in kitchens. Follow the Brahmaputra as it slips out of the gorge and it stops being a blade. Here's the crazy part: it's the same water but a different clock. In Assam, it spreads, stalls, and builds sandbars that migrate like towns. Planting isn't a date on a wall, it's a line on a step. Families watch how far the water has fallen on the Ghats, how fast a new char greens. A week used to mean a season's difference. Now an evening surge that lifts lamps on a bridge can steal that week and hand it to a city's 7 p.m. demand. By dawn, the river holds its breath. Seedlings sit ready, pumps cough air. Markets translate the river's mood faster than ministries do. A row of fish stalls runs by sound, ice chipping, knives on wood, vendors calling prices that moved before sunrise because a gauge upstream blinked. When dry season surges go thin, prawns shrink. The buyer at the corner knocks a rupee off each kilo, then two. A boatman who learned the reversal of luck by moon and monsoon now checks a nephew's phone for a chart that updates on the hour. The numbers don't explain why his net came up with pebbles, but they tell him tomorrow will be lighter too. Meanwhile, Bangladesh lives inside a delta that breathes. The right flood is a broad, gentle hand. Silt settles golden, ponds refill sweet, and rice wakes up greener than memory. The wrong one is a late, sharp knuckle. Embankments tear, salt rides inland, and a year rewrites itself around brackish wells. A school teacher in Burasol keeps a notebook, columns for color, smell, and depth. Tea brown means silt she loves. Gray-green means trouble. April's line slants lower each year. The tube well tastes off by the 10th bucket. She times cooking by power and pumping by rumor. When a cousin messages from across the border that they're releasing tonight, she stacks pots on stools and moves books upstairs. Vietnam's Mekong Delta plays the same song in a different key. Salinity lines creep inland like slow handwriting. Farmers who once planted 3 rice rotations now hedge 2 rice, then shrimp, or pivot to fruit that tolerates a tongue of salt deep into canals. In flood years, sluices open to inhale a tide of silt. In lean years, they ration sweetness with a schedule taped to a commune bulletin board. The calendar used to be lunar. Now it's lunar plus a damn ladder plus the day. The extension worker's motorbike makes it through. Cambodia's Tonle Sap feels the pulse flatten. The famous reversal, that lake inhaling with the Mekong's rise and exhaling when the river falls, arrives late and leaves early. Fish aren't an abundance anymore, they're a window. Community fish refuges, Deep pools no one touches, keep brood stock alive when dry season shelves bite. A mother times fermenting jars by the lake's breath. Now she peels the lid on a rumor and the sour comes too soon. Her son's night paddles map silence, then a midnight uplift that isn't a storm, just a release arriving out of phase. Cities downstream live by the hour. Dakar's pumps push brown water through miles of pipe on pressure that depends on how a valley hundreds of kilometers upstream decided to blink. A bottling plant staggers shifts to chase the late evening grid pulse. A clinic's generator idles longer in April when the intake runs shallow. In India's interior, power sprints at 6 for urban air conditioners and leaves a canal cold at dawn. A miller changes her schedule because sacks come late. A child does homework under a streetlight wired to a line that's greener during city dinner. Microfixes stitch the gaps. Assam's embankment committees cut deliberate notches so a crest fails into a field that can afford to drown. Raised hand pumps keep sweet water above a creeping lens of salt. In Cambodia, bamboo fences collect silt along a falling bank. In Vietnam, a sluice gate operator texts downstream, open 2 notches at noon, and for once the tide agrees. These aren't triumphs. They're the difference between a house on bricks and a house on mud. Data sharing arrives like a guest who knocks, then leaves mid-sentence. Monsoon season bulletins help. 5 days notice lets a ferry tie up high and a market roll up tarps. Shoulder seasons turn murky. A test release for turbines lands as a 3 a.m. scare. WhatsApp groups bloom, then curdle when the last alert costs sleep for nothing. Trust becomes a resource scarcer than diesel. A good forecast is a gift. A wrong one is a wound people remember through harvest. Some families go. A flooded char pushes a household toward a brick kiln job inland. A string of light nets sends a teenager to factory floors near Phnom Penh. Remittances buy a new pump, a motorbike, an extra year of school for the youngest. Calendars stretch between places, payday here, transplanting there, peaking hours back upstream. The river writes itself into these divides. A release that makes a skyline shimmer pays an overtime shift that buys rice for a kitchen where the tap ran salty at noon. Downstream lives don't hold press conferences. They bend. A grocer opens at 9 because power now hums at 11. A fisher swaps his net mesh for smaller, then smaller again. A teacher adds a bucket to her lesson plan and a salinity meter to her purse. Calendars in kitchens take on pencil scars. They still hang next to a picture of a river everyone thought they knew. Now it has a schedule. They learn to read it, argue with it, and swallow it, one gate turn at a time. The $10 trillion exposure, counting the uncounted. Stack the map by sectors and the quiet bill shows itself. Agriculture pays first. A week's mistyming on a cascade can delete a rice rotation across a district. That isn't a yield number, it's diesel for emergency pumping, seed bought twice, loans rolled at higher interest, and fertilizer to replace the silt that never came. Multiply by basins and seasons, and you get food price spikes that don't wait for headlines. A trader watches onions jump a rupee in Assam as a peaking surge steals a canal hour. In the Delta, shrimpers pay for salinity creeping past a sluice with new gear and lost days. None of it shows up in a dam's benefit cost line. Energy looks like electrons until you price the buffers. Hydropaking keeps a megacity from browning out at dinner. Downstream, hospitals and water plants buy bigger generators to ride the troughs. Grids that lean on peaking push distribution companies to overbuild transformers and pay standby fees when canals and power slosh out of sync. Batteries paired with dams could shave those costs. When they don't, the bill lands as tariff hikes and quiet productivity losses. A mill that misses a shift because power arrived at the wrong hour and diesel was spent on pumping instead of milling. Shipping pays by dredge. Sediment trapped upstream means channels rise with weeds and mud. Ports chase moving bottoms with cutters and clamshells. Each monsoon writes a new map. Each dry season writes a new invoice. Insurance edges up after a glacial lake outburst flood reshapes a reach in a day. Barge schedules slip when a late, sharp crest parks driftwood under bridges. Pilots earn their keep in inches. Finance prices the inches. Health pays invisibly until it doesn't. When dry season base flow thins and salinity lines creep inland, tube wells turn metallic and clinics hand out antacids and iron tablets as if the river were a diet. Floods arriving out of phase wash latrines into ponds meant to restock sweet. Waterborne disease counts climb a week after a test release collides with a storm. Hospitals schedule extra dialysis when intakes flirt with brackish. They don't bill the river. They bill families and overworked nurses, then the ministry, then donors. Everyone pays late. Migration carries the balance on foot. A farmer who loses 2 seasons in 3 sends a son to a kiln, a daughter to a line in a city. Remittances arrive and buy a pump and school uniforms. The village ledger shows resilience. The region's wage floor shows stress. A cluster of low-flow years across basins shifts labor markets and raises urban rents. Planners call it opportunity. Families call it algebra. Who stays, who goes, who returns when the river remembers itself for a season. Deltas are balance sheets written in silt and subsidence. When sediment stops, land sinks under its own weight and the sea steals centimeters. Engineers respond with levees and pumps, then higher levees and bigger pumps. Salinity nibbles roots and the crop mix tilts. A fruit orchard replaces triple crop rice, then a ditch becomes a shrimp pond because brackish is now the only honest water. Export earnings look good. Protein shifts from fish most people could afford to shrimp fewer can. The ledger balances in hard currency and loses in diet. Industrial corridors depend on seasonal reliability they don't control. A textile park bets on steady power and water at a price set by fields and fish it never sees. A midnight surge floods a dying room. A pre-dawn drop stalls a boiler and ruins a batch. Managers add safety stock, tie up capital, and stretch lead times. That cost lives inside spreadsheets labeled working capital and expedite fees, not river. Investors read it anyway. Get this, the compounding arrives when multiple basins misbehave at once. That's the moment markets move before ministries do. A drought thins the Mekong's pulse the same month. A peaking schedule on the Brahmaputra steals canal hours in Assam, while the Yangtze stretches a release into a heat dome. Grain prices jump together. Coastal grids buy extra gas at the top of the market. Fleets queue at dredges in 3 deltas. Insurers reprice risk. Sovereigns borrow at higher spreads to fund emergency imports. Households cut protein to pay school fees. The number isn't a single catastrophe. It's coordination by accident. Hidden externalities keep the sum slippery. Fertilizer replaces silt and runs off. Dredging solves navigation and deepens channels that invite salt. Health costs arrive as pills and missed days, not line items on a hydro budget. Migration smooths income in villages and stresses infrastructure in towns. Each fix pays, each fix adds. The temptation is to shrug. That's development. Except the dials upstream are turning those costs into policy. Peaking schedules that chase markets export volatility as if it were a commodity. Sediment trapped for turbine safety raises downstream municipal budgets without consent. Data withheld to protect operations forces mayors to buy sirens and boats that might not be needed if an email arrived on time. None of that lands where megawatts are tallied. So where does 10 trillion live? In present value of decades where timing risk taxes every sector at once. Agriculture, energy, shipping, insurance, health, migration. Cross countries bound to the same roof. It sits in deltas propped up by concrete instead of silt. In grids that buy batteries late because gates moved first. In families that pay twice for water, once at the tap, again in the clinic. It isn't doom. It's a math problem disguised as weather and policy. And the only way to find the edges is to follow the rumor back to the dial and ask who timed it, who paid for it, and who got paid. Treaties, data, and denial, the governance void. Rules are the difference between a dial that people trust and a dial that starts rumors. On paper, Asia has both. The Indus Waters Treaty drew hard lines in ink and remarkably held through wars. It parceled rivers by name and season, wrapped them in courts and commissions, and forced engineers and diplomats to live in the same meeting rooms. It isn't perfect. Drought still bites, canals still run dry, but the lane is there and faces new political strain. Everywhere else, the lanes blur. The Brahmaputra, born as the Yalang Tsangpo, has no basin-wide binding pact. There are seasonal hydrological bulletins, monsoon levels, flood alerts, a phone call before a big move. The shoulder seasons where timing matters most for fields and grids, memoranda of understanding, not enforceable calendars. On the Mekong, the lower basin states coordinate under commission. China, calling the upper reach the Langkang, stands outside the treaty and shares selected data through a parallel framework. Helpful, yes. Sufficient when drought turns a river to glass. Ask a fisher stuck in mud who watched a schedule change on a screen he doesn't own. Public statements repeat two phrases, hydropower and flood control. Internal memos talk timing and discretion. Operational needs cover peaking, test spills, and reservoir hedges when forecasts wobble. Without hard floors under releases and audited, year-round data, operational becomes a windbreak for whatever the grid or ministry needs that hour. Downstream, that sounds like denial. Not denial of physics, denial of responsibility. Meanwhile, basin commissions without teeth grow polite. They convene, publish, and recommend. They do not compel. A mayor in a Delta city can print their guidance, but she can't build a budget on a suggestion. Investors read the footnotes and price risk higher. Insurers translate non-binding into premia. The cost shows up first in electricity tariffs and fertilizer sacks, then in interest rates sovereigns pay when they borrow to dredge, build, and patch. Data is supposed to be the great soft fix. Share it early, share it often, and let everyone plan. But the plateau's gauges live upstream of most people who need them, and access rides on trust. During monsoon, a 5-day hydrograph posted hourly can save a market stall from waste and a ferry from a wrong turn. In March and April, when base flows decide crops and salinity lines, the website goes sparse, the annex is delayed, and a spokesperson points to maintenance. A fisherman doesn't argue with servers. He marks 3 bad weeks in a notebook and sells his net. That's how denial turns into migration. Here's where denial gets loud without raising its voice. Rumors fill gaps that transparent numbers would occupy. A photo of a full reservoir in a drought year circulates, context dies, resentment blooms. A rumor of a midnight release empties houses onto rooftops. The siren never sounds. The next real warning gets ignored. Online, arguments cherry-pick discharges and satellite shots. Offline, embankment boards bicker while a crest rides past. Governance is confidence. Confidence eats timing for breakfast. There are blueprints for better. The Indus model showed how binding allocations, dispute resolution, and continuous technical committees can make enemies share a calendar. Environmental flow requirements can be set at lifeline levels, ramping rates limited by design, and peaking synchronized so cascades don't stack a punch. Hourly, audited data year-round changes rumor into forecast. But those fixes demand 3 things nobody likes to spend: megawatt hours, sediment, and sovereignty. Megawatt hours go when peaking softens and minimum flows bite into dispatch. Sediment goes when bypasses send grit past turbines to feed floodplains and deltas. Sovereignty goes, symbolically, when an upstream operator accepts audits at the gauge and penalties when a ramp exceeds a band. The payoff is everything money pretends to be: trust, lower risk premia, and household calendars that stop bleeding. Denial lives in 2 places. One is old, we don't have a problem, it's just weather. The other is modern, we can't change operations, the grid needs us. The weather line doesn't survive the graphs. The grid line is partly true and wholly incomplete. Batteries can catch the twitch so gates don't have to. Markets can pay for frequency from electrons instead of water. Ancillary services can be bought from stacked storage, demand response, and thermal units left for that job. Hydro can breathe like a lung again, not drum like a kit. Treaties that matter count teeth, tie data to consequences, miss a bulletin window, lose a share of a peaking payment. Tie flows to finance, a line of credit that cheapens when lifeline minima are met, tightens when they're not. Build basin panels with real seats for the people who hear the river's voice, not just read its numbers. Publish ramping bands by station and watch trust creep back 1 week at a time. While that was happening on paper, denial kept moving water. A midnight test spill in shoulder season met a valley that planted at dawn. A temporary peaking pattern became a habit that shrank a lake's window for fish. The governance void isn't empty. It's full of improvisations that look fine in a control room and feel like betrayal in a kitchen. Fill it with rules, audits, and clocks everyone can see, and timing stops being a weapon. It becomes what it was before: concrete, season, schedule, and promise. Logistics of control, oxygen, fuel, and fragility. Power at altitude lives on a ledger nobody posts. At 4,000 meters, engines breathe poorly, people slower. Here's the thing: maps don't show oxygen, ledgers do. A truck that hauls 20 tons at sea level crawls with 15 on these grades, drinking diesel that gels if a night drops hard. Turbochargers work overtime. Mechanics carry extra filters like talismans. Crews rotate on acclimatization cycles, sleep low when they can, work high when they must, spend days paid to adjust. Time becomes a line item. 3 lost to headaches is 3 not moving pipe. Winter turns that tax into debt. Passes seal under wind-packed snow. Black ice hides in shadowed S-bends. Avalanches erase hairpins without apology. Convoys wait for a patch of sun, then sprint the window before the cold bites again. The work season shrinks to months, where stockpiles must cover the rest. Fuel depots sit like lighthouses along the corridors, drums under tarps, heaters humming to keep diesel from waxing. Run them dry, and a county's clinic goes silent first, then the oxygen plant. Permafrost plays spoiler from below. Ground that felt firm in October slumps by July. Embankments creep, culverts tilt, slabs heave. Thermosiphons wick heat upward, reflective rock blankets throw sunlight back. Drainage is coaxed like a patient. Maintenance turns into governance. Graders scraping ruts before sleepers break. Infrared cameras hunting warm patches that predict failure. Crews patching short to prevent big. A derailment here isn't a headline. It's a week of empty shelves and a generator that doesn't get its delivery. Communications ride the same thin line. Fiber snakes the highway. Repeaters cling to ridges where bolts complain in the wind. Valleys eat line of sight. A storm knocks 2 towers and a district blinks. Dispatchers switch to HF radios and handwritten logs. Redundancy becomes policy. 2 routes for data, 2 for power, a backup generator where it hurts most. Everything costs. Emptiness justifies it. With no side roads, no informal tracks, the map is clean and the failure points bright. Stockpiles are the plateau's insurance. Grain reserves for towns that miss a convoy, oxygen cylinders stacked for a week, when weather pins rotors down, spare rails and bridge trusses staged by number beside the line. Prepositioned kits sit at graded pads, a helipad here, fuel bladders there, rations sealed against cold. Flight plans dance around density altitude, trucks carry chains like prayer beads. When a glacial lake outburst flood tears a span, the script is practiced. Drone the damage, send front-end loaders, slide a truss into place, brief by loudspeaker when cell flickers. Fuel ties every artery. Heat, mobility, communications, even water treatment ride on diesel and electrons. Managers run triage spreadsheets when a pass closes, dim streetlights to keep the oxygen plant alive, throttle industrial loads to keep a hospital warm, delay a pour rather than risk a convoy. Triage isn't drama, it's Tuesday. Meanwhile, climate volatility shortens tempers. A sudden thaw saturates slopes. A cold snap splinters steel. A brown wall from a high lake writes detour across a valley in minutes. Emptiness simplifies and sharpens. Fewer settlements along corridors mean fewer detours to serve during a crisis. Convoys don't unload flour in every hamlet when a substation burns. It also means fewer hands with shovels when a drift traps a grader. One bridge can strand a prefecture because there's no spiderweb of backroads through private fields. The system rewards graceful failure and punishes assumptions that the road will be there tomorrow. Logistics is a heart with very few arteries. Keep them open and silence cooperates. Let one clot and distance multiplies a small miss into a regional story. You can read intent in the mundane. Thermosiphons replaced early and rails tamped on schedule mean a ladder of dams downstream can keep peaking at 6. A fuel train that arrives on the dot means the oxygen plant at 3,600 meters hums and a clinic breathes easy through a storm. A new avalanche shed over a suspect cut tells you the corridor's cadence won't give politics an excuse. Ply the ridges with graders and you ply the valleys with clocks. Operators know the threshold where routine slips into risk. They watch oxygen percentages and fuel levels the way others watch poles. A convoy that misses twice triggers rationing. A tower's batteries dip and engineers redraw a patrol route. No heroics, just strict accounting at altitude. The plateau forgives planning, not hope. Every fix buys hours. Hours keep gates predictable, trains on time, and kitchens downstream from guessing when to move pots upstairs. This is control at thin air, oxygen as logistics, fuel as policy, fragility as a map you maintain like a promise. A valley, a gate, a family. The order came on a Tuesday, folded neat enough to pretend it wasn't heavy. And here, where it hurts, Dorje read it twice in the yard, where yak bells used to ring at dusk. relocation for ecological restoration, it said, and public interest, and a promise that the apartment would have tap water and heat. The word it didn't use sat quiet between lines: hydropower. A man from the bureau arrived with a pen and boots too clean for the track. He explained the stipend for livestock reduction, the key exchange, the school seat for their daughter. He said lake and safety and future, and didn't look down at the pitted stones that told Dorje where the river had laughed in spring. Behind them, trucks climbed the bend at night, hauling sections of something that only had one destination. Moving day was small. Poles that had held a tent through 3 winters stayed behind, leaning like elders. A saddle with fresh stitching went to a cousin across the ridge, quota still intact, luck intact for now. On the flatbed, a trunk of wool, a kettle blackened by years, prayer flags faded to the color of old sky. The herd thinned into cash and silence. The apartment smelled of new paint and old dust. The window faced east, framing the slope that had been a calendar and a storybook. Their daughter traced the outline with a finger and asked when the animals would come home. Dorje said soon and felt the word land like a stone. At the gorge, the gates learned the river's voice. First, a low hum in the belly of the valley, then a surge that arrived at 6 like a bus. Fishers downstream waited for the color change that used to mean plenty. It came late, nets lifted light. Fields that drank by ear found the murmur turned into a schedule. Now it fills when the lights need it, a neighbor muttered, snapping a hoe handle without meaning to. Dorje took a job on the access road crew, orange vest, steel toes, a foreman whose cadence matched trains. Pay came on Fridays, headaches on Mondays, elevation reminding him he was not 25 anymore. His wife sirring like the clinic and the school. Tap water that ran warm at dawn made chores feel like the future. She kept a ledger on the fridge. Stipend in, rice out, medicine when the cough returned, a small box for festival. Festival moved. The monastery's drum sounded inside a plaza lined with barriers. The old hillside circuit crossed a fence topped with a camera. A police jacket waved people through with a practiced smile. Butter lamps flickered under a sky that looked the same and didn't sound the same. Every month, Dorje rode his motorbike to the overlook above the new lake. He said it was to see friends, then found himself counting eddies like debts. He could name the saddles under that pale water, the hollow where lambs once lost their fear. The reservoir stretched into curves that matched the brochures. The spillway gleamed exactly like a promise. He learned the new clock without admitting it. At dawn, he touched the radiator. Warm meant the gate had turned in the night. His shift would start early, the forebay refilled before the city woke. Cold meant a long day and a late text from the foreman. Their daughter learned her own measure, homework under light at 7, a dark hour at 9 when the apartment breathed, then a blink back to brightness that made bedtime slide. The year the storm came early, a test release met clouds at the wrong hour. The river arrived brown and fast and wrong. A footbridge snapped like a word bitten off. Sirens lagged, WhatsApp ran ahead. Dorje worked through the night, shoveling rock into bags, lungs scratching at the altitude he used to laugh at. Officials handed out blankets 2 days later. Forms were filled, loss acknowledged, cause unspecified. People adapted. A bamboo fence caught silt where a bank had slumped. A shop sold oxygen cans next to tomatoes. An uncle began raising fish in a tank where a goat had slept, because the canal ran when the grid needed it, not when his field did. Sirring folded the ledger to make space for a new line, battery lantern, bought on sale. One morning, Dorje stopped at the old bend. He crouched and listened. The stones still told jokes, just quieter. He lifted a handful, let the water choose which to keep, and stood up. "We'll go by the radiator," he said when he got home, "until someone shows us the clock." After the first activation, the river lost its old chatter. It stopped speaking in pebbles and began to speak in hardware. The valley learned a new dictionary, a turbine's throat clear at 17:58, the spillway's flat vowel when the gate lifts, the brittle click of gravel sucked off a bar, then silence as clean as a shut door. Even the dogs flinched the first week, ears cocked toward that belly-deep hum that rose like a train in a tunnel and settled in the bones. The water still ran, but the sound had edges now, square, rehearsed, arriving on the minute. The radiator became an altar because it told the truth when the sky didn't. Every dawn, Dorje's palm flattened on the iron ribs. the cold biting his skin before warmth crept out like a secret. Warm meant the gorge had drawn a breath in the night, power had climbed somewhere far away, and the forebay had been refilled while the town slept. Cold meant a waiting day and a foreman who wouldn't text until the grid found its appetite. He stopped looking at the wall clock. Steel told him more than hands did. Heat in the pipe was a message from the river's new throat. His daughter started telling time by the hum. Seasons had been her teachers, first thaw, first yak calves, first blue on the willow. Now she learned a city's pulse through the concrete. Homework begun at the evening rise when the bulbs brightened 2 shades. Teeth brushed during the midnight dip when the hallway went gray. Lights out postponed by a late surge that arrived like a held breath. She drew calendars with little waves for each night's swell and trough and asked which one meant festival, which one meant the market truck, which one meant mother's shift. Not the moon, she said once, palms on the radiator like her father. The sound. Strategic void, why emptiness endures. Step back from the gorge and read the plateau like a planner. Ready for the uncomfortable part. The blank spaces aren't failure, they're a tool. At altitude, everything costs more oxygen, fuel, attention. Filling the map with towns would multiply fragile lines of support. Leaving it open makes movement legible. A dust plume on an otherwise clean slope reads like punctuation. Patrols see farther, repairs move faster, and when a siren needs to sound at 3 a.m., there are fewer doors to knock. The military cushion comes baked in. Units based high adapt their blood and their habits. Corridors resupply them on a timetable the state controls. Fewer civilians near ridge lines lower the political price of a sudden redeployment or a road closure. Fewer evacuations if a standoff lingers. Emptiness turns accident into inconvenience. It also turns rumor into a manageable signal. With fewer kitchens to multiply a story, timing holds. Hydrology adds a second lever. Headwaters sit in valleys that are hard to inhabit and easy to police. Sparse settlement reduces compensation packages, court fights, and last-minute vetoes at dam sites. When a glacial lake outburst flood barrels down a side valley, it meets pasture, not a neighborhood. That's not mercy, it's policy. Fewer downstream claims when operational needs demand a test release. More room to stage excavators and bridge trusses when a slide takes a bite out of a spur. Administrative efficiency climbs the same ladder. Services concentrate in nodes where oxygen and fuel can be counted. Inspectors visit 10 buildings in a morning instead of 10 camps in 2 days. Welfare flows through accounts, not caravans. The grid hugs the corridor, the clinic sits by the siding, and the school schedules its day to the train. People get more, and the state sees more. The price is paid in places left quiet on purpose. Economics at altitude never loved sprawl. Engines derate. Construction windows shrink. A factory that needs just-in-time parts bleeds money every time a pass closes. So planners shepherd industry where logistics make sense. Mines where all meets road, turbines where the gorge narrows, tourism where coaches can turn around before the air bites. Subsidies keep the nodes warm. The grasslands stay thin, not by neglect, but by design. Cost curves become a map. Culture bends inside those lines. Monasteries fold festivals into plazas, pilgrimage routes pass through checkpoints, rituals keep their cadence under watch. Fewer unscripted meetings on ridges where cameras don't reach. Devotion travels worse than trucks do. Emptiness smooths social flow into manageable waves, the way a reservoir flattens a flood. Compliance becomes choreography. The map looks calm. Climate volatility argues for legibility. With glaciers thinning and permafrost slumping, repairability outruns expansion. Corridors that can reopen in a week beat a spiderweb that collapses in a storm. Sparse hinterlands reduce the list of wells to deepen, houses to raise, and roads to scrape after a brown wall roars down. Wetlands can be fenced, siphons installed, thermosiphons replaced, and inspections kept on a clock. The fewer variables, the fewer surprises. Meanwhile, timing remains the quiet weapon. Emptiness upstream makes timing easier to hold. A peaking schedule isn't a negotiation with villages, it's a dispatch from a control room. A sediment window gets scheduled when crews can reach the gate, not when a market downstream prays for a tide. If the grid needs a sprint at 6, the gorge answers. The cost lands where the river widens into kitchens that never saw the dial. There's a ledger nobody posts. Emptiness lowers risk at the ridges and raises it in deltas. Fewer civilians near the ladder of dams, More households far away matching dinner to a ramp rate they can't see. Fewer court cases at a headwater bend, more dredging invoices where silt never arrives. A cheaper patrol today, a costlier embankment tomorrow. The trades are quiet because they cross borders. Still, the void persists because it works. It buffers border friction without crowding crises with bystanders. It backs hydrological control with fewer moving parts. It makes administration measurable where physics already punishes waste. It fits the economics of thin air. And because the headwaters feed half a continent, choices made in silence carry farther than speeches. None of this is free. Families like Dorjes pay in calendars rewritten, rituals resized, and rivers that learned a schedule. Towns downstream pay in pumps and pills, but the machine that demands emptiness keeps its receipts in uptime and ramp rates, not in stories. It will endure until the cost of distance outgrows the discount of control, or until rules downstream make timing a shared calendar, not a private clock. The bets on that future will look like small changes: batteries stacked at peaking plants so gates twitch less, audited flows that put lifeline minima under the sawtooth, real sediment moved past concrete on days the tide and planting agree, payments for space that floods on purpose, 1,000 sponges to match one dial. If those arrive, emptiness can soften from lever to landscape again. Until then, the void stays curated. Steel keeps time, concrete keeps score. The wind over open land carries quiet that isn't absence, it's policy, and the next move, it's on the clock. Playbook that doesn't lie, limits, repair, and reality. If timing has become leverage, then survival starts with limits the dial can't ignore. Not slogans, hard bans and flaws. Lifeline flows come first, numbers written into licenses and contracts that don't vanish when a heat dome sits on the grid. Publish the minima by station, season, and hour. Put a gauge downstream that everyone can see and agree on, then tie money to it. Miss the floor and a payment slides from generation into an escrow that funds fixes where the river widens. Cliffhanger payoff: when floors hold for a season, rumor fades. Hard part: grid operators and energy ministers push back, warning that hard floors threaten reliability and invite blackouts. They parade worst-case curves in hearings and ask for exemptions that quietly swallow the rule. Floors only work if regulators hold their nerve when the first heatwave arrives. Ramping bans are next. No more cliff edges that turn fry into scales on cobbles. Set maximum up and down rates by hour with gentler slopes at night and dawn. Stack those bands across a cascade so the punch doesn't compound. Announce them a season ahead and stick to them unless a certified emergency breaks glass. If a genuine emergency hits, notify like lives depend on it, because they do. Expect resistance. System operators call bans operational handcuffs, and some ministers frame them as anti-development. Draft bans get watered down in the comment period. Temporary waivers become quarterly habits. The rule survives on paper and dies in dispatch if no one watches. Coordination beats heroics. A basin drought playbook shouldn't be a wish list. It's a choreography. Pre-agree the order in which reservoirs give up water when forecasts go sideways. Pose the trade openly. Megawatts shaved in July for salinity lines held below intakes in August. If the plan needs batteries to keep lights on while gates soften, write the batteries into the rule curve. Require scheduling that taps storage first for the twitch, so rivers don't have to sprint every time a cloud moves over a solar farm. Utilities will fight it. Some refuse to fund batteries that rob their peaking revenue, arguing cost recovery and regulatory uncertainty. Boards point to shareholder duties. Treasurers price storage above the line, then stall. Without cost recovery reforms and penalties that bite, battery lines stay on slides, not on sites. Sediment is not a nuisance, it's a crop. Build bypass tunnels and sluice windows into operations, not just into glossy plans. Time them with the first monsoon surge and a tide that helps deltas hold what they're owed. Accept that turbines will eat a little grit some years. Price that against dredgers hired downstream, fertilizers bought to replace silt that never came, and embankments raised again. A bypass that looks expensive in a boardroom can be cheap in a market where protein depends on floodplain fertility. Operators will say operationally impossible. They point to safety margins, staff limits, and turbine wear, then postpone windows pending further study. Without third-party audits at gauges and gates, sediment plans remain annexes that never turn valves. Repair what leaks before you reach for bigger taps. Loss control is the fastest water you'll ever find. Patch canals, line laterals where it pays, fix city mains that hemorrhage at 30% non-revenue water, and show the savings in pressure at the tap. Then demand reuse as law, not as brochures. Treat, return, and track. A megacity that cools towers on polished effluent buys the river room to breathe. A factory that meets a return flow neutrality target turns growth from a rumor into a partner. Expect foot dragging. Water utilities fear that exposing losses invites rate battles. Industries plead global competitiveness and ask for delays. The cheap water is politics, not pipes. Rules need teeth and a wallet. Index finance to behavior. Cheaper credit when lifeline flows are met for a season, when ramping bans hold, when sediment windows run as scheduled. More expensive money when warnings go late, when peaking overlaps across a ladder, when the public gauge contradicts the bulletin. If a utility pairs peaking with batteries and proves gentler gates for 12 months, the regulator cuts their ancillary service costs. If they don't, the battery fund collects from them instead. Today, most of those enforcement levers don't exist. Regulators lack statutory bite. Basin panels publish reports no one must obey. Until penalties travel automatically with missed bans and late bulletins, rules will read brave and operate timid. Enforcement isn't just audits, it's trust built with clocks and witnesses. Put citizens on basin panels with voice and vote. Fishers who can tell you exactly what a 10-centimeter drop in 20 minutes does on a bank they work. Install community monitors at known pinch points and let their data publish automatically. A phone video of a ramp spill shouldn't be the primary archive. The official record should arrive before the rumor, in enough detail that markets and ferries plan calmly. Farmers will still squint. After years of temporary waivers and surprise night releases, they ask the only question that matters. Will this hold in a heat wave when the city calls? Credibility arrives slow, leaves fast. Emergency play matters because physics still wins some days. Train siren networks like you train line crews, quarterly, scripted, bilingual, boring. Stage boats and blankets where floods actually arrive, not where it's politically comfortable. Practice glacial lake drawdowns before monsoon with siphons and crews who know the trail in the dark. Tie dam operator drills to municipal drills downstream, so a release and a siren and a bridge closure feel like notes in one song, not 3 bands on different stages. Budgets fight back. Sirens don't win ribbon cuttings. Drills get cut when fuel is scarce. Liability fears cancel joint exercises. Make it law, or it fades when the calendar fills. Energy markets can stop paying rivers to twitch. Buy frequency with electrons, batteries, demand response, flexible thermal on standby, not with water every time. Pay a premium for predictability. A peaker that holds the slope so a canal manager can sleep gets more than one that just hits megawatts. If a hydro station wants full price at the evening peak, it posts a next day ramp schedule by noon and hits it within a band. Miss the band, lose the bonus. Hit it for a month, earn a longer leash. Incumbents will litigate. Ancillary tariffs become battlegrounds, appeals drag for years, pilot programs expire before they scale. Reform is a trench, not a tweet. Agriculture needs a seat at dispatch. If a shoulder season shave would steal a canal hour that keeps seedlings alive, price that hour like the grid prices evening air conditioning. Offer irrigators day-ahead signals with confidence intervals and payments for shifting off critical moments. Fund controlled drainage and on-farm storage that buy 24 hours of independence when gates move off beat. Then, in monsoon, pay to drown fields on purpose where floodplains can breathe for the rest of us. Expect split rooms. Upstream farmers suspect any promise that depends on a distant control room. Downstream tenants ask who gets paid to flood and who gets told to move. Without transparent payouts and grievance channels, compromise dies at the village gate. None of this happens on press releases. It lives in license annexes, smart contracts tied to gauges, batteries stacked in yards that look like shipping containers, and 1,000 culverts cleared before the rain hits. It's a basin app that shows next day flows and ramp bands in language people use. It's a clinic getting a text that says, salinity likely by Thursday with choices attached. truck water at a discount covered by an upstream penalty, or wait and accept a risk clearly labeled. And it's a regulator with enough law to say no when the first waiver request arrives with a minister's letterhead. But wait, there's more. Finance can follow the rules instead of the ribbon cutting. Multilaterals and sovereign funds can condition the cheapest money on transparent data and verifiable flows. Insurers can shave premia when basins hit coordination metrics and raise them when shoulder season opaqueness becomes a habit. Debt swaps can retire older peaking machines that can't ramp gently in exchange for storage that soaks the twitch and wetlands that shave crests. Bankers will still ask, who enforces this when governments change? If the answer is a memorandum, the rate goes up. This is not an argument against concrete. It's an argument for the right kind of certainty. Big reservoirs acting like slow lungs, not drum kits. Batteries catching the sprint. Wetlands and floodplains doing the old work quietly. Minimum flows written in steel. Ramps that the river and the kitchen can ride. Sediment going home. Data that arrives before the rumor. The truth, getting there means bruises, court cases, loud hearings, and a few lost elections. Limits tell the dial where it can't go. Repairs make the old system stop bleeding. Reality says there will still be nights when the sky laughs at all of it. On those nights, trust turns a warning into a move, and a move into a story told without anger. And the next morning, the gauge shows the floor held. The path is hard-won and uncertain. It's still the only one that makes kitchens safer than rumors. Abrupt and uncomfortable. At dawn, Dorje's palm finds the radiator. Warm means the gate turned while the town slept. Cold means wait. His daughter already knows the clock by the hum. In Assam, a farmer stands over seedlings that should be knee-deep and aren't. In Barasol, a school teacher draws one more tea-brown circle in a notebook that's mostly smudges now. This isn't weather, it's a schedule. That's where 10 trillion lives. Not in a headline on ledgers that look like dinner. Rice bought on credit when a canal blinked. Diesel burned because a test release arrived at 3 a.m. Pills for brackish wells. Dredges chasing silt that never came. Rent in a city because the lake's window for fish closed early. A lantern for homework when the grid sprinted at 6 and left a village at dawn. Trillions are the sum of these cuts, basin after basin, year after year. And here's the line in the sand. 2025 is when the old delays run out. Glaciers that banked mistakes are thin. The plateau's heat pump is erratic. The monsoon bunches into bursts and silence. Without rules that put floors under flows, smooth the ramps, and send sediment home, dials turned at dusk will keep rewriting kitchens and markets far from the gorge until there's no calendar left to trust. So the choice is simple and hard. Treat rivers like wires and keep paying in seedlings and salt. Or treat time like a commons, lifeline minima in steel, ramping bands that living rivers can ride, batteries catching the twitch so gates don't have to, wetlands and floodplains doing old work on purpose, audits and hourly data that arrive before the rumor. Either way, the bill comes due. The difference is who pays and with what. If this hit your gut, don't leave it on a screen. Ask for the flaws, demand the bans, fund the sponges, make peaking earn its place, push basin data into daylight year-round, because every morning a hand like Dorje's touches iron to guess a gate we are choosing. Want the full reveal? The next chapter shows how Arctic melt and redirected rivers are already reshaping grids and trade, and how the same calendar politics moves ships, ports, and prices. Tap the deep dive on your screen, subscribe if you want dials turned into rules, and join us in forcing year-round data and basin floors that hold when the sky doesn't.